button, so you'll all get the, oh, somebody else hit the button. Was that one of our team that did that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Lisa.
Mhm.
Mike, are you kicking us off then?
Yep, I'm waiting for the slides to show up, but appreciate everybody getting here, and we're um, here for our second meeting of the folks that participated with the Research Advisory Committee back in the day. So it's good to see all of you again. Some of you were at our first meeting, and I don't know if any of you missed the first meeting. So this is a effort that the department took on to evaluate progress on the key action items that the Research Advisory Committee produced in their report. And so we've been in the midst of doing that evaluation for the last 6 months or so. Many of you have gotten surveys or emails and you've had conversations with us. So I don't know that any of you need all the background, but that's the work we've been doing. And here we have Jenny to start us off, and then we have some discussion items, some asking some questions about what comes next. And we've got 2 hours scheduled together, and knowing this crowd, we can fill those 2 hours just fine, talking about interesting, important things. And so maybe I'll send it over to Jenny to kick us off.
So, Mike, just really quickly, we do have one person on the phone, and I just wanted to make sure we acknowledged who that was. It's area code 916-882-1064. So if that person happens to hear my voice, you could just check in. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
Yeah.
Lisa. I, just want to provide some brief opening remarks and set the stage for folks that maybe weren't at the last workshop, and set the stage, of course, for today's conversation in a little bit lighthearted way and a way to wake you up after lunch. So if Robin, you don't mind advancing the next slide. Oh, doesn't seem like the sound is going to come through. Oh, shoot. Didn't work. Well, okay, in our trial run, it was the Star Wars music, and had a little scroll through of the rise of Floodmar. So we'll share the slides with you, and you can watch it on your own. Let's go to the next slide. So, in our Star Wars story, we talked about the Rebels meeting, but that was really the Research Advisory Committee, our subject matter experts. And, our Research Advisory Committee met in 2018 and 2019, really setting the stage for partnerships and knowledge for that rise in Floodmar. Next slide, please. The RAC was tasked with a number of uh, asks for meeting. And I think the biggest really is to highlight here just that integration across sectors. And I love this graphic. I wish I knew who to credit for this, but something we found, a number of years ago when we first started talking about Floodmar and watershed scale planning, and really just the importance of people getting around the table and integrating across sectors, having conversations, really making those connections, building that body of knowledge, filling gaps, and setting the stage for an integrated water resources management strategies such as Floodmar. So we've got the next slide is RAC Fun Facts by the number, putting this together, kind of wrapping everything up, putting a bow on the Research Advisory Committee. It was pretty cool to see things by the number and kind of building that out, that, the Research Advisory came together, or Advisory Committee came together with two co-coordinators, Daniel and Roman. We had 3 meetings and 1 workshop over the 2 years of meeting. There were 13 research themes led by 31 co-leads, and some people changed. That's why it's not, exactly 13 times 2, but we had 31 over time. We identified, of course, those 39 priority actions. We had 100 organizations represented by over 200 subcommittee members. So Great participation in the RAC, and that research and data development plan identified, I think, over $150 million of funding need for those priority actions. And next slide, getting into those priority actions, I think there's this table is just something for everyone to be really proud of. We've made a lot of progress on most of the priority actions. A lot of the RAC members continue to work together to progress these priority actions. And I think just seeing the snapshot is really exciting about, the RAC coming together, identifying these priority actions over a handful of convenings, and really over the last 5 years, seeing those recommendations and priorities get into action. And, many of them, well, several of them are also, completed. So that's really great to see the work of this committee, getting implemented and furthered. So the 40th recommendation, or at least that's what we've been calling it, the network. We've got some fun facts for progress in the network as well. Robin, if you go to the next slide. The network has been convening for several years now. We have one coordinating team that helps direct the activities of the network and sets agendas for our workshops. We have one information hub, floodmar.org. We've had 4 public forums. We have 6 action teams that are meeting to progress work together. We have had 9 network workshops, 40 Lunchmar webinars, and our network has grown to over 500 members. So just, another great success and result of the initial RAC coming together. Hopefully folks have had time to look at some of the products that have been released by the network over the last couple of years. One is the network story that kind of tells how the RAC got together, recommended the network, and then how the network has evolved over time. And we've also released a celebrating 5 years of Floodmar. And it's really amazing to kind of think back to the start of the RAC and how, this was this concept, some people were implementing, but there was still a lot of uncertainty around the implementability and feasibility of Floodmar as a concept when we, then evolved to, in 2023, seeing Floodmar being an organizing principle of a governor's executive order. So, that just trajectory alone is pretty amazing for how Floodmar has advanced in the last 5 years. And I think, as this quote from our 5-year celebration paper indicates, it really is a testament to, the RAC and the collaborative action that has built the foundation for Floodmar and allowing for that rapid transformation. So I think it's pretty amazing and definitely something to celebrate. Next slide. And so, this is a graphic that has been around since some of the early days of talking about Floodmar. I'm really talking about what it's going to take to implement Floodmar on the ground. And, Floodmar is simple in concept, but difficult in implementation. There's a lot of things that need to be considered. I think the questions that are on these implementation factors illustrate the interconnectedness of Floodmar and the necessity to collaborate across the table with our partners and other folks working in water management. And so it really, highlights that importance of integration, sharing knowledge, really developing multi-benefit, multi-sector solutions. And so it's kind of, we reflect on this history of the RAC and some of the Floodmar development. The conversation today is really looking towards the future. So next slide. where we'll structure our conversation about what the next 5 years look like and, how, we all kind of see this future of Floodmar. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, this is a fun kind of meeting because I get to jump back and forth between being one of the co-chairs of the RAC and being the facilitator today. So that was fun sitting back and hearing the recap. And so the next period of our meeting, we have time set aside for a discussion on the research and data development plan and the work of the RAC and the successes that it's produced. And so we have a series of 4 questions. We're going to go through them kind of one at a time to sponsor our dialogue. Knowing this group, by the time we get to the 4th question, we probably will have answered it already. But that's the strategy we're going to use. So I really appreciate everybody being here today. And it's going to be going, you've been in a listening mode for 15 minutes. Now you're going to be in a talking mode. So Robin, why don't you take us to the first one? So we want to start with envisioning a success, and the question that grounds us here is if or slash when, I'd like it to be a when, we gather in 5 years' time to celebrate again, 10 years out, what will we be celebrating? What are we envisioning will happen over the next 5 years that will be our next group of celebrations?
I'll go first.
Go ahead, Rich.
I think with all the work the GSAs are doing on their sustainability plans, there's a lot of I think momentum about how can we get more water into the ground and how do we take advantage of these flood years like we've had the last couple years. So I think in 5 years from now, we will have seen some really on the ground implementation of Floodmar, and hopefully on a fairly wide scale, not just one or two offs, but a number of different areas that are we're able to, and let's say we have a wet year and next year or the year after, that they'll be in a place to actually implement Floodmar on a significant scale. So that's what I see happening in 5 years.
Thanks, Rich. What else will we be celebrating 5 years from now as a Floodmar community?
I'm going to put one out there. An interagency water diversion process that is perhaps separate from other water rights processes, but is distinct for Floodmar, that looks at the critical factors of environmental flows and flood management conjunctively.
That sounds like a good project to celebrate 5 years from now. Has anybody started it yet?
There's discussions.
Nice. That's great. That's the one that'll probably take 5 years. So maybe we'll be ribbon cutting.
That might be
Yeah. What other visions do you have for our 10-year celebration 5 years from now?
Abdul put something in the chat. I don't know, Abdul, you want
I'm
to
sorry, I don't have that window
describe
open.
it?
Let me pull that open.
No, I can talk about that. I was writing my number 2, so I can talk about both.
Yeah, go ahead, Abdul.
So the first one is I hope to see Floodbar becomes a standard water resources management practice strategy all across California. So I hope our effort and with extended partners, that becomes a reality. So that's number one. Number two, I was just going to write down, and I saw that when, and obviously it falls on my shoulder, 50%, and the other 50% on the other co-chair. I saw that we are quite a bit, at least we have not evaluated properly, that we are lacking in some of the tools development aspect. So I would consider that from 5 years from now, we do have a suite of integrated tools for flood project assessment, project planning and assessment. Thank you.
So in the mode of celebrating in 5 years, that's a challenge that we will have overcome. So your suggestion is 5 years from now, we'll be celebrating the
Yes.
successful development and use of those tools. That's great.
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah, this Kamyar, I guess with my state government hat on, I would like in 5 years celebrating much further alignment and coordination between state agencies, in particular those who have regulatory responsibilities, to expedite the implementation, and I'll say the safe implementation of flood managed aquifer recharge on to scale. So at, let's say, watershed scales.
Kamyar, is that appreciably a different suggestion than what Daniel said a moment ago? And if it is, can you help me understand the difference, or is that a +1 for his suggestion?
Plus, it's a +1.
Yeah.
Just kind of coming at it from the state.
Of course.
Because often what I've experienced is state initiatives, especially those that require local implementation, are often focused on what locals have to do to make it work. And we somewhat are hesitant or reluctant or oblivious to the fact that we have to change the way we behave and operate to actually enable and empower that implementation.
Yeah, thanks, Kamyar. I think one of the things that I'm going to switch hats for a second as a member of the RAC. One of the things I hope to celebrate 5 years from now is that we've built stronger bridges between our desire to augment groundwater resources with the fact that our groundwater resources are in many cases contaminated, and therefore the people using it without sufficient resources to use it safely are really in a bind. And so I think we need to, I'm hoping 5 years from now we're able to celebrate that we've made that integration part of how we're thinking about this in supporting wellhead treatment and other, consolidation strategies, other strategies to make sure that people who have a drinking water relationship with contaminated groundwater are part of the dialogue that we're having here. Who else has something I'll switch back to facilitating. Who else has something that they'd like to celebrate 5 years from now?
And I'm going to suggest something, and this is a current discussion within DWR going on based on the analysis done as part of the various watershed studies in the San Joaquin Valley. So I would like to see that when we talk about flood-mar, along with Mike, what you just said, the water quality aspect. The other thing I want to suggest that forecast-informed reservoir operation is actually these two, flood-mar and forecast-informed reservoir FIRO, are sort of advanced as an integrated strategy for resource management and recharge.
Thank you. Celebrating the joining together of FIRO and flood-mar. Yes, I like it. I heard another voice just before Abdul spoke, though, but I didn't see where it came from. Was there another contributor?
Yeah, I put something in the chat.
Oh,
and it's really
you want to voice it, Glenn?
Yeah, I love this group, and I think this group has done so much amazing work. I hope the work is being led by other people in 5 years, and in particular, GSAs, farmers, communities, in particular vulnerable in DAC.
Yeah. So we're celebrating the fact that we're all retired happily, and we're watching the next rung of leaders carry out this meeting. Okay, I'm in.
And I
5
think
year.
building on that,
Go ahead, Jenny.
yeah, building on, what Glenn said, and I think I heard this at the Sustainable Conservation webinar from one of the growers that participated. We've seen this evolution over the last 5 years of growers being somewhat skeptical of Floodmar and not, really, understanding the risks and being a little risk reluctant maybe to now, there's been adopters. And as someone said in the last workshop, we don't really need a lot of the crop suitability information anymore because growers are just doing it. They're testing. They're figuring things out as they go. And I'm hoping in 5 years we're celebrating, Floodmar being a agronomic practice. That is just something that everybody does. And part of their annual crop rotation or annual planning is where can I do recharge this year?
Is there anybody on the line who has vision into the flood risk mitigation elements of our path here? Do we have someone participating today who can look at this, thinking about how 5 years from now we can celebrate an impact on flood risk?
Well, FEMA does something that they call loss avoidance studies. So I'm, thinking if there is, which is likely, another wet year before our next, 5 years is up. Looking at Floodmar on the ground, and it's at such a scale that we can actually go back and look at if there wasn't that Floodmar happening. Maybe in conjunction with reservoir reoperation or things that were happening in that wet year, what could have happened. And so FEMA calls those loss avoidance studies, where they kind of look at where they've implemented projects and go back and see like all of the potential damages that were avoided because the project was in place. And, one of the things that they've calculated based on these loss avoidance studies is for every dollar in mitigation or like early project planning, you get back at least $7 in benefit. So, early mitigation is better than, paying for damages after the fact. And so it would be really amazing that if that next wet year, we've got Floodmar happening at such a scale, you could actually account for that decrease in damages.
Yeah, thank you.
I would add to that, one of the key lessons that's coming out of the watershed studies is the true flood benefit is not from the acreage that we put water on, but in the reservoir management. And that really the FERO managed reservoirs has to be a key component to reducing the flood peaks. Even if we used every acre we had, we couldn't pull enough water off during those most critical moments. So in 5 years, how far can we move with the core and with changing the rule curves? I don't have a good projection on that. There's other people that are much more involved in it.
Well, we can say we'll celebrate progress on that path, and maybe it's a lot of progress, and maybe it's a little.
And I guess just recognition that the reservoir management is going to be a key to success of this strategy.
And Abdul, does that sound like what you shared a moment ago about the link between FERO and Floodmar?
Yeah, very similar concept. Yes.
Yeah.
I would also add that not only flood risk management, based on the analysis. I know Jim Wicking and others are there; they can speak more. But even the water supply part, I think FERO has to be sort of integrated with Floodmar to get both the benefits, flood risk and water supply. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Abdul. Go ahead, Kamyar.
I was just going to say that along those lines, what would would be needed is that the flood managers and the groundwater managers and the ecosystem managers would be moving toward co-management, not just communicating or event-driven coordination, but rather a more strategic co-management of a watershed
Yeah,
and anticipating those integrated approaches before the event actually happens.
thanks, Kamiar. Emmanuel, I saw something in the chat from you and you came off mute. Do you want to voice your contribution?
Sure. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So I put something in chat. I would like to see Vladimir as, the chains of, the approach that we look at right now is like it is a flood rest, floodwaters is flood rest, but we should also look at, Vladimir or floodwaters as a valuable resource. And also along that line, I'd like to see something in the next 5 years from a policy and an incentive framework that Vladimir needs to adapt some supported, frameworks, including economic incentives and regulations that facilitate the use of floodwaters for managed aquifer recharge and progress towards hopefully integrating Vladimir into the GSPs, aligning with the Sigma objectives.
Yeah, let's all celebrate that. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Jim, I saw you come off mute a moment ago. I don't know whether it only lasted a second. I don't know if you had something to share or if that was just tapping your space bar by accident. Must have been an accident. Robin, why don't you take us to the next question? I think it's a good segue. We had a segue a minute ago from Jenny, but I decided to pass on it to give a little more time for this one. But Robin, could you take us to the next question? There it is. So a lot of us were here in the 2019 Research Advisory Committee. I don't know if all of us were, but many of us were. What do we know now that we didn't know then that should be part of the next steps? So as we're thinking about, as we collectively as a Floodmark community and the department in particular is thinking about what to do next, there are some actions in the research and data development plan that you saw are either underway or not started or still moving. But there must be things we didn't know about back then that we need to be focused on. So we would really love to hear this group think a little bit about what didn't we know about that isn't in the report that really needs to be a priority.
Well, I have one. It's a little bit off tangent from the report itself, but it's very related, and that's I think we have a better understanding now of the challenges certain groundwater basins are having to achieve sustainability and getting plans approved. Particularly, I'm thinking Tulare Basin. So I think that knowledge kind of highlights the need for FloodMar and to find a way to focus maybe resources efforts in some of those areas.
Yeah, I remember back in the day we were starting to see that a lot of people were saying we're going to recharge our way out of the problem, but it was early days, and I imagine a lot of research has gone into that since then.
Yeah, I'd add to that, Rich, we didn't have the land repurposing program through the Department of Conservation when we met originally. And I think that's part of that demand reduction, Mike, that you're mentioning, that along with recharge and supply enhancement, we now recognize that demand reduction is happening and a planned strategy for that land retirement or land repurposing that actually assists with recharge so that we combine the efforts so that there's funding from repurposing that also enhances the opportunities for recharge under FLEDMAR. I think bringing those programs together is a big opportunity.
So in the context of the research and data development in research and data development mindset, in that topic you just brought up, Daniel, is there a gap or is it just underway and it needs to get linked in?
I think it gives a more tangible way to think about the land use chapter. In the land use chapter, I think the committee struggled with how do you can't dictate land use very easily. County general plans can identify critical recharge areas, but linking that then to the funding and policy of the MLRP, I think is a path forward that maybe we weren't thinking about at the time.
Thanks. Are there others? Things we
Just going to
didn't.
say,
Oh,
and
go
I
ahead,
think what
Kamir.
Daniel just said actually speaks to something in the summary of our first workshop, and that was it seemed like the land use area, there was some uncertainty about whether there was progress. Yet I think the multi-benefit land repurposing program is part of that story. And I think when the first plan was developed, that program didn't exist. And I think the thought was more about land retirement and people kind of leaving the land. And now with repurposing, I think it's understood or recognized that the landowner can stay on the land, change the land use to reduce demand. But as Daniel mentioned, you can do that in a way that can also promote recharge. And I kind of kid and I said we should just put MAR after a lot of things like solar MAR. And I just saw an article the last couple of weeks where Westlands Water District is looking at converting or repurposing 200 square miles into solar energy. Now, could you imagine if they did that with the ability to recharge under that 200 square miles? That would be scaling up FloodMAR in a dramatic way. And I think just getting people to make those connections and it's not I mean it'll make it more complex to do the solar panel installation, but I think it's doable and it would really pay dividends. So I think this whole multi-purpose multi benefit repurposing is a big part of this solution.
Yeah, and Emmanuel just put in chat something that I think is right alongside it, and I don't know if you're in a position to speak about it, Emmanuel, but the idea that not only is it helping with FloodMAR and repurposing, but it's also actually penciling out nicely on the financial side too. Emmanuel, do you want to expand on that at all, or does the chat need to stand for itself? Oh, you're there. Good. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a growing recognition, as I mentioned in the chat, that Plasma is a cost-effective option compared to other, infrastructure-heavy solutions. And there are quite a few studies that speak to that, particularly in managing the extremes of flooding and drought. So, informed by these new studies, I think that there's since 2019, we have again a clearer perspective on the potential for plasma projects to serve as economically efficient alternatives to traditional green infrastructure. So we are now, actually touching on what we call as nature-based solutions. And I would say plasma could potentially be a sort of a nature-based solutions, and other studies speak to that as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I rose my hand because I was gonna share almost the opposite experience as Emmanuel. That what are some of the things that I've learned, or I didn't personally know in 2019. I think there was a lot of assumptions early on about the cost effectiveness of FloodMAR and the ability to use existing infrastructure. And, my experience has been that it's a lot more expensive than I was thinking. And there are a lot of challenges with, the expense of new water rights, the expense of screening new diversions. So, in some cases, FloodMAR can be as expensive as desal on that scale of, project cost efficiency. And so I think it really, something that belongs in this effort perhaps is, how to improve the cost efficiency of floodmar projects because it should be very cost effective. We're talking about, high flows and in many cases nuisance, potentially damaging flood flows and the use of existing infrastructure, but the actual implementation of on the ground projects has been surprisingly expensive.
Jenny, are you referring to the
Yeah.
green infrastructure projects or the on-farm?
More, a little bit of both. Because I think, as we've learned kind of from the temporary water right permit process, a lot of our assumptions right away was like, oh, well, we're going to use this existing point of diversion. But then, it's an unscreened diversion. So the project then transitions to using temporary pumps with fish screens. And the temporary pumps, operation is and rental are pretty expensive. And, the screens can run the gamut of cost too. And so, when we're thinking like, oh, well, we'll just use this existing point of diversion, that's not really what's been able to happen on the ground.
Jenny, this Kamyar, when we do that ledger analysis of cost benefit, wouldn't we also want to include, based on what we're learning in the watershed studies, what hardscape, how much would it cost in hardscape to reduce the flood risks that we are predicting? And putting that also in the equation that if Floodmar were to bring down flood risk using floodwater diversion by a certain amount, how much would that reduce the need to use gray infrastructure to reach that same flood risk reduction, and what would that cost?
Yeah, I guess, a couple thoughts on that. I don't think we'll see the big potential of Floodmar reducing flood risk without reservoir reoperation. I think there's a scale in here that I think is very similar to the atmospheric river characterization scale that Scripps uses and the Center for Extreme Weather and Water Extremes. I think we have to think about Floodmar in multiple scales that, there are floodwaters that are mostly beneficial. These lower, lower flow, higher frequency that we wet up the floodplains. There's lots of benefit there. Those are inexpensive. We're not really reducing a flood risk, but we're maximizing the benefits of flood water. And there's, somewhat beneficial, somewhat damaging, but we want to increase the benefits of that. And then there's the mostly damaging. And without reservoir reoperation, you're really not gonna get those damages down too much. So I think we have to kind of think about scales of operation for Floodmar and maximizing the benefits where we can with the tools that we have available.
No, Tim, you got your hand up, but
Yep.
what we're seeing is Furo without Mar is nowhere as beneficial.
And it sounds like it's the obverse is the opposite is true too, that the Mar without the Furo. Yeah.
Correct.
Yep. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, just to double down on what Jenny's saying, it's not just the cost, it's the inflexibility of our institutional regulatory programs. We're not willing to explore. I mean, it's just as fundamental as exploring whether or not this risk is something that's worthwhile to take on or to evaluate further. And I think we're starting to push that wedge in that door. And it's this group that's been very instrumental in opening that door and getting people to start thinking about it. And frankly, the watershed studies, all of the work that's gone on here to support and paint this picture is important, but we have a long way to go to start to really evaluate how we can create the flexibility in our institutional programs that are limiting our ability to capture and utilize these waters.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So maybe one of the things we didn't know now we didn't know in 2019 is how many institutional hurdles there still were, and perhaps how many institutions were actually holding hurdles and not participating with us. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I was adding to that. I think it's worth to point out explicitly that now we have 2023, and we didn't have 2023 before 2019, or in 2019, we didn't really have a year where all eyes were on the snowpack, massive snowpack, massive runoff, but in a way that was probably as optimal as it will ever be for Floodmar. And it provides an opportunity to use the data that we had collected in 2023. And I'm assuming more so than any other year before, given what GSAs are doing and given the attention to Floodmar, we have that data set to help us plan some of the things for which we didn't have that data set before in terms of doing Floodmar and striving to maximize what we can do. And the institutional barriers and identifying these institutional barriers on what we went through in 2023 is one big part of that. I think it's also, I would imagine it's a great data set for the reservoir reoperation opportunities that are potentially out there. So just something to point out. Having that data set and taking advantage of that data set is really important. On a really small scale, we have more field experiments in my own shop, having had an opportunity and having more opportunities here in the near future to do some plot scale Floodmar with monitoring wells right next to it and looking at some of the chemistry and either confirming or dissipating some of the concerns around water quality degradation is going to be really important moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Are there other? Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
I was just going to add something about the experience of 2023 because it was, you know, a catalyst for a lot of action. There's water on the ground. How do we maximize it? And I think something that we learned, you know, perhaps we didn't know in 2019 the willingness of landowners. And I think in 2023 we learned pretty easily there's willingness. You make it easy. People will divert water onto their land, and I think the recharge that was done under the executive order illustrates that when you've got you know, a process in place for people to respond, you know, immediately to water availability. You know, you can recharge 600,000 acre feet or whatever it was with not a ton of effort. And it was those areas that had both a local flood agency and a very active groundwater manager at the county or GSA level, whatever that would be, that work together well. Madera County, Lower San Joaquin Levee District is, you know, an area that I'm thinking about. When you've got some existing relationships at the local level between groundwater and flood managers, they made that that EO work very, very quickly.
Thanks, Jenny. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, this is a short build off of what Camille and Daniel said earlier about multi-benefit land repurposing. I put it in the chat, but some of the insights from the watershed study show that, you know, 10,000 acre feet of recharge in one watershed is not the same as 10,000 acre feet of recharge in another watershed, right? There are really significant differences, and our ability to create a value proposition from our that's not just water supply, groundwater levels, that really touch upon all these other factors, I think is essential to create enough of a compelling argument that MAR should be adopted at the scale that it can be.
Thanks, Glenn. To the point of the 2023 data set and the others that Thomas mentioned, I know we've learned a lot. I mean, obviously climate change data keeps rolling in, our sophistication understanding of the climate change that is already baked in is getting stronger. And I think the other one that's really worth mentioning is that I think our understanding of the broad impacts of subsidence has also grown over the last 4 years. I'm curious if there's elements of our understanding of climate predictions or our understanding of the impacts of subsidence that are new since 2019 in a way that's worth mentioning.
I don't know about new. I think more about recognition of the magnitude of the impacts. People are starting to actually quantify what those impacts of subsidence are on not only meeting the sustainability goals for groundwater basins, but what it means to the conveyance of the surface water that is absolutely necessary for them to effectuate their plans and continue operating their systems. So I think there's a higher level recognition of the impact, and we're seeing things like the Frank Kern Canal actually be quantified, and seeing the repairs that have been done and watching those repairs slide by because of continued subsidence. So there's a recognition, I'd say, most significantly here.
Does it belong in the discussion in a way because of it, Tim, do you think? Does it need to become more prominent in the way that Floodmar is thinking about deploying itself?
Yeah, I think it does, and it's something that Stephen's not here, but Graham, the groundwater subcommittee, we actually talked quite a bit about where are you going to conduct recharge matters, and what is that connectivity in the geologic system that would effectuate different issues. So if you have something that can penetrate deeply into the basin below these clays and repressurize those deepest aquifers that are being depleted, that are causing a lot of the subsidence issues, that's an area you want to target for that purpose. Otherwise, you might target other areas that have shallower penetration depths, and you're targeting, disadvantaged community drinking waters, or recharge to, or delayed discharge to rivers and streams for ecosystem health. There's a lot that we've learned, and there's a lot being advanced there from, we started off, I think in 2019, we were just getting started on the AEM efforts. So those data are collected and they're being synthesized, using a much broader set of data that are out there to really start to characterize where are optimal locations for recharge and for what purpose. And that's the kind of information that's really going to hopefully save local agencies a lot in terms of funding for decision making on which projects are a priority for them moving forward. I'm
Thanks,
sure
Tim.
others got ideas.
Yeah.
Can I reinforce that? Looking at the R&DD plan, when we talked about the environment, the terrestrial and riparian aquatic section, it was really focused on the floodplains themselves and where we recharge matters. And I think we've learned, as Tim was just saying, we've learned a lot about recharging away from those locations and benefiting the groundwater dependent ecosystems. And it wasn't something that we were that focused on at the time because we didn't have the AEM and didn't have the groundwater models all linked up. So I think it's an area, a new area that will hopefully draw in more of the environmental community and the river community to think about not just the diversion reducing flows, but the subsequent year, drought year return flows being enhanced. And I think that's a big opportunity area that we weren't thinking about, back in 2018, 19.
Yeah, that's great. Last call on this question because the next one's provocative and I want to get to it when I
Mike,
can.
I have one
Go ahead,
thing to
Jenny.
add, just
Yeah, please.
kind of on the climate change side of your question. I don't think the understanding has changed, but I don't think we've grappled with some of the implications yet. So I think there's broad awareness that when water is available is changing. In historical hydrology, it's been snowmelt driven. It's more in the springtime. With climate change, that's going to shift to the solidly winter months, January, February, March. That is not when most people have their water rights. So it changes, that picture of when people expect water to be available and when they have a right to that water. which raises some interesting questions about, how do people adapt to that shift? How does the water rights system adapt to that shift? And as kind of, a state agency and also policy folks on this call, how do we equitably adapt to that shift? We can't, how do you minimize, those that have the means and resources to go after new big water rights for this winter water, gobbling that all up before you kind of actually say, all right, let's step back and what's the best way to manage this across the watershed? And that our system's not set up like that. The water right system is first in time, first in right. So the first person to get that water right application in, even if it's huge, that they're first in line, first in right. So I think there's got to be a step back moment where we all kind of look up at like, all right, the system's changing. How do we all kind of change with it and make sure that we're maximizing benefits to as many folks as possible, in approaching our watershed management in a climate future.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. That's great.
So
You get lots of
provocative
smiles
thought.
and nodded
Here's a
head. Go ahead, Kaimar.
provocative thought. If we're moving toward and recognize the importance of watershed scale planning and management, maybe we need a watershed pooled water right, so that folks who come together in a watershed, they trade and share their water rights toward mutual benefit.
Yeah, I was just wondering in my head if flood management agencies could get water rights to those flood flows, and then it's their water to put where they need to put it. Yeah.
They're real hesitant to even suggest that flood flows are in the water rights system.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so on to the provocative question. Go ahead. So can we call the RDD plan a success? Is it time to say that that plan that came out from the RAC was a success? And if yes, awesome. But if no, what's missing to make that claim? Is it more projects? Is it more knowledge? Is it something else? So those of you that helped craft the thing, what do you think? Can we now claim the RDD plan a success for the influence that it had and the work that it prompted?
I can start. I think, in my view, the fact that the administration, the state policymakers, and the department managers or department directors talk about FloodMod, FIDO, and show some level of knowledge about those strategies. I think that happened because of R&D plan and all the activities which happened around it. So I would say 100% success, but I would say mostly a success. Thank you.
Thanks, Abdul. How about others?
I'll jump in. Absolutely, it's a success. It was a research and data development plan. I mean, the idea of such a function is to explore some initial hypotheses and try and implement some of these actions. I think we've implemented a lot of the actions identified in there, and we've identified new research, new needs for us to address these things. We've been talking a lot about the institutions and the funding and equity. I think Jenny's all over it with that. I love the concept of shared pool resources, at watershed scale. These are new ways of thinking that are only emerging because we've exercised what we could with the initial hypothesis and identified new opportunities that are out there. So I think for the purpose of the plan and what it did, it absolutely is successful in advancing the concept and us re-exploring how we better manage the water resources moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Emmanuel adds on to the question, gave us a sub-question. How would we measure that success or indicate that success? And we're hearing some qualitativeness. Emmanuel, I know you're probably looking for quantitativeness, but I'm a social scientist, so I'm perfectly comfortable in the qualitative side. How about others? I know Daniel, we've got you queued up to do some closing thoughts today, so I don't want to steal thunder from that section of the agenda, but what do you think?
There was an underlying goal with doing the plan that goes beyond the data and research, which was to build the collaboration and build the partnerships to carry it out. And on that front, I think we've been extremely successful. The goal of the plan was not to have DWR do all the work, but to bring in other parties. And DWR has been a fundamental supporter and funder and has done a large share of the work. But I think the fact that there's so many other groups out there now engaged in FLEDMAR is another indicator of success. That it's not just a department white paper. It's a commonly used term, and so that's another indicator I would use. The other piece I guess I'm thinking about is if the plan created all these different opportunities, these 39 objectives, goals, and we haven't done all of them, to say that we've been a success, the numbers may not show that we've done everything. But I think we also need to ask ourselves, do we need to do all those things? And should we instead be focusing our efforts on some of them and refining it? And that's something we can talk about more later.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, this will echo some of Daniel's recent comments. The existence of the network as the 40th priority, I think, is wholeheartedly 100% successful. I think it's led to a 5x or 10x increase in the amount of conversations that are occurring on a collaborative sense. So I feel very comfortable saying that. The only thing about the plan, I would say, is I apply this additionality lens. That's kind of a term often used in the carbon and climate world. But if the plan had not existed, would some of this research already have occurred or occurred anyway? And I can't answer that question. So I think it's a little bit hard to quantify, but yeah, from a collaborative sense, I think it's definitely is.
My thoughts are going, Glenn, where I think you were going at the end too, is like, if I were to say success, yes or no, I think it's both. And that we had the right people in the room who had the pulse of what needed to happen, and those things kind of just happened. It wasn't that the plan was, intentionally pushing people to do stuff. People didn't go back and say, I did this because it was a priority in the plan. I think, things were just the right priorities were identified and someone was going to do it because it was necessary. And so I think we developed the plan that was reflective of the research and data priorities. And those things kind of just happened. It wasn't, necessarily someone read the plan. It planted that seed of an idea and said, okay, now I'm gonna implement this research. So I think the plan could have been implemented with a little bit more intention of saying, okay, like how do we do this? How do we do this together? And we're doing it because it was as a recommendation of the plan. I think it would all kind of happened a little more organically.
Yeah, you're speaking my favorite language now because you're saying the making of the plan was maybe as important as the plan itself. The act of everyone getting together and doing it. So that really lets us go to the next one because I think we tagged it briefly. Can you take us to the last question, Robin? And so Daniel had a glancing blow at this concept, and I'm curious if there's contributions beyond that of the things that we thought were important in 2019. Are there things that don't need to happen? And Jenny mentioned it earlier that, some of the priority on helping growers feel comfortable that their crops can handle it has become less important because they're just doing it. And So there are the things that we thought we needed to do that we don't. Um, are there things that we definitely have to do because it's the path to implementation? And are there things that would be nice, but if we don't get to them right away, that's okay?
I think the things, and if you look at the actions that kind of had the least progress or the greatest uncertainty about, where we're at with those, that was kind of the data and tool side. Things like the cost benefit stuff and implementation tools, valuation tools. So I think those are things that are kind of should be part of the kind of the foundation of work. So those are things that I think need to happen and over the long term, and may not, it's not like in my mind, a short term thing. It's just like to support from the state perspective, anyways, to support FloodMar. We need to continue to invest in those tools and make sure those folks that are implementing FloodMar have access to those tools.
Is there anything we thought was really critical that hasn't been mentioned yet today that turned out not to be?
This come I think it was already said, and I think when we were working on the R&DD plan, there was a lot of emphasis on what is it going to take to get landowners and farmers in the comfort zone to do FloodMar. And I think a lot of that has been demonstrated, and there's a lot of willingness. So I think now the focus in my mind is a lot of the institutional side, the people and regulatory side, the sociology and the psychology. I think it's the institutions that are impeding the scaling up of FloodMar. And when I say FloodMar, I also include FIRO, because I think of it as watershed level co-management of the water sectors. I'd also suggest that I think the Merced watershed study and the subsequent San Joaquin watershed studies were influenced significantly by the work that was done around the R&DD plan. In fact, the initial motivation was to test out many of the concepts that were discussed. And so I would argue that we probably wouldn't have done the same type of studies and engaged the same number of people had we not done the R&DD plan. So I think we've generated a lot of data and put tool sets together that previously had not been done or contemplated.
Thanks, Kamiar. Are there other thoughts on this? Something that you haven't contributed already. I know this question is dragging us back to many things that have already been said. As I suspected at the beginning, we would have answered question before we got to it. Lisa, are you there?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Well, I know you know all of us, but you haven't been embedded with us the last 5 years. I'm curious if you would be willing to improv a little reflection on what you've been listening to for the last 45 minutes.
I think that because everybody's been living it and breathing it, they probably are not fully recognizing the significance difference that's been made in just the general conversations about FloodMar. So I can remember Kamiar you going out to FMA meetings and talking to people about FloodMar. And there were a lot of people in the audience with crossed arms, and that was in 2018 that was happening. And I can remember being out working with GSAs, and the concept of FloodMar wasn't anything people were thinking about as they were beginning to think about how they might do their ground management. I'm currently sitting and working with 3 GSAs where that's front and center. That's being considered an essential tool that they're going to have to bring into the mix. One of the things that you were talking about is understanding about how land might be repurposed and what that might mean. So I think the group itself may be underestimating the significance just in the adoption of the concept. Interestingly enough, as you've began your conversation, you've also influenced what's happening nationally. For example, the group just received a national award that was evaluated by other water agencies and academics through the American Water Resources Association, talking about sort of the implications of an effort like this, of the collaboration of pulling together these kinds of opportunities. And it's helping the entire nation rethink how they might actually approach some of these difficult problems. So I would just offer that may not be. The other thing that you've done, I think is I would call it tilling the soil. So there were things that back in 2018, 2019, they were considered third rails. So much in the same way that groundwater was considered a third rail back in 2012, 2013. And by the work that you're doing, you've opened the door to allow people to begin considering things that simply couldn't have been on the table.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. I knew you'd have an interesting perspective from the meeting, but I see Thomas has a hand up too. I don't want to miss that. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I was going to say, among those outstanding items, one of the conversations that we had about a year ago or so, with a bunch of different stakeholders, carved out that there are stakeholder groups that are fundamentally opposed to managed aquifer recharge as a way to continue doing agricultural business as usual, or even agricultural business under a constraint, under the constraints that AGMA will not fix, and are looking to focus exclusively on floodmar projects that also have additional benefits. Basically, looking at multi-benefit projects where it's not just about enhancing groundwater supplies, but where a lot of other benefits are achieved with that floodmar. And that might be a conversation where this is a conversation that I'm not normally privy to and that I'm not really engaged in, because this is a conversation mostly between, I imagine, GSAs and environmental stakeholders. But I'm wondering whether that aspect is something that should be on our radar, and addressing that through additional communication, through additional engagement of the various stakeholders, in addition to the information that we all know still needs to be produced, is something worth calling out here.
Yeah, it sounds like strengthening our ability to kind of describe and quantify in multiple ways. I should say multiple only once in that sentence. It sounds like there's a need to strengthen our ability to quantify the multiple benefits available to a floodmar implementation, and in both sort of the adoption discussion, but then also in the economic conversation that we've been having today too. It seems like in both of those places, a strengthening of how we talk about and quantify and describe and teach the multiple benefit pathway sounds like something coming out of today.
Mm-hmm.
Is it necessary? On this question, it's a necessary item. Yeah.
And Mike, I put in the chat 3 items that I think are on the necessary there, which I think may be getting to what Thomas is referring to in terms of the partnership groups that are currently reluctant to support or opposing FLEDMAR, and that's the water quality effects of especially the on-farm recharge on DACs, the defining of water availability while protecting environmental flows. So the environmental community, the rural disadvantaged communities, both are critical partners and that still have reservations. So if we don't address those through a multi-benefit approach, we're not going to have buy-in. And then the permitting, which we've talked about already.
Did you direct message that to someone? Because I don't see it in my chat.
Oh, I sure did. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Well, we really appreciate the discussion, obviously, and for everyone's participation. I'm going to move us past our discussion and give a little bit of an update of where we are on the consultant team that's supporting the department on this evaluation. And so I just have sort of one slide to talk about. And you saw this earlier from Jenny's, but I added that last row at the bottom where at our previous meeting with all of you prior to our really ingesting all of the survey work and comments that we received, the numbers were slightly different. We had only 15 underway, 11 partially, 2 not started, and 11 uncertain. And you can see one row up that we've started to adjust this table, and through all of your input, the input of those of you that are here and others that are not here. And as we move forward, our sort of timeline on this evaluation is to hopefully wrap it up this calendar year and get it submitted to the department for the use of them and all of the FLEDMAR partners. Our strategy is to contextualize the evaluation as being grounded in our ability to make this evaluation within the time and capacities that we had. Our goal is to remove the uncertain column. So everything that's in that uncertain column will come out into one of the other spots, either to the not started or the partially underway. And then some uncertainty will be placed over the whole thing, of course, because this is what we were able to discover in the time we were provided. And if there's anything that's missed, it's because we didn't find it in time. So that's the goal that we're taking on this. There is a plan to get, obviously the draft got sent to all of you prior to this meeting, but it still has lots of holes in it, stuff we haven't written yet, executive summaries and whatnot. The draft, once it's fully ready, I believe Jenny's hope is to run it through the co-chairs for a quick review for those that have the time and energy to do so. Probably a 2-week comment period for the co-chairs who are still engaged and wish to have that engagement. So that's kind of where we are on the evaluation itself. It's really improved only through the engagement with everyone, which is true about FLEDMAR from the get-go, is that it's a collaborative effort. And I know that Marisa was bummed not being here today. It's been a central project of hers for a while now and something she's invested a lot of her time in. And it's exciting to see the outcome of what all the work has done, right? Seeing this and seeing the 39 priority action items. And to Jenny's point, maybe they were going to happen anyway, but to Lisa's point, maybe not. And the fact that so much has moved in such a quick amount of time is something that I think is really testament to the collaborative effort of everybody involved. Does anybody have any questions, sort of structurally to the consultant team that's building the evaluation? I'm happy to answer them if there are any.
Mike, maybe I'll just add and clarify with you. We did share a preview draft of the evaluation document as things stood on Friday. I don't think that starts, we didn't start our 2-week
No.
comment period yet. We still want to take a little bit of time, incorporate what we heard today, allow for this group to make some comments, still respond to the survey if you haven't had a chance yet to. And so the 2-week period has not started yet. You've got a preview draft, so it's actually a little longer than 2 weeks if you count this.
Well, it'll be 2 weeks when it happens, right? Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear on that. Yeah, once we have the final draft ready, and so that will include all the parts written and vetted by Jenny, then there'll be a 2-week period established for the co-chairs to take a look at it.
Mike, this Kamyar, along the lines of the report and the comments that we've heard today and also from Lisa, I would suggest that we not underestimate or underdescribe the value of the RAC and the network, and even this process that we're embarking in now as a model for how multidiscipline, multi-sector planning can be done effectively. And just like the Stantec team put together and CCP, kind of the story of how the network came to be and the process we used, I think it would be helpful in this report to also reflect on the impact and importance of the RAC, the plan, and also this evaluation process as a model for what others might want to do to be able to navigate a multi-sector, multi-benefit type endeavor.
Yeah, thanks, Camille. There will be an element of the, as we all say, the 40th action. The network will have a place in here, so it may be in the context of that work that we can get some of the ideas that you're sharing. Yeah, and I appreciate the comment. I heard another voice though. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
a process person, and I am convinced that everyone who participated in the R&D plan left differently than when they started. So even if they went and did other things, they were influenced by the interaction and the plan preparation.
Yeah, I can personally sign on to that claim. Okay, if there's no other questions about the evaluation, I appreciate the Abdul, I appreciate the colon idea. You got a colon and a dash in the title, like a true academic.
No, this is the limitation of doing it in a chat.
No.
So,
I'm just playing, right? The
yeah,
academics love their colon
because
titles. Yeah.
the reason I wanted to suggest a title, and this is in line with what Lisa and Kamia said, I think we need to, this report, we need to make an sort of make an impact with it because this is important. So that's the reason I think the title is also important. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. It's a good suggestion. And you know, the provocative question we asked, like, was it a success? We didn't ask it just willy-nilly because we really want to be able to express the consensus and some of the ideas that you shared today in the way that we describe this evaluation, because the evaluation is about the granularity, but it is also about the totality of the RAC and the RDD and the network too. Okay, this takes us just a few minutes ahead of schedule into our concluding thoughts, and this is a round robin, and we're gonna invite each of you to share. Some of you have been sharing a lot, and Rich has always been my first commenter, so maybe I'll come back to you, Rich, to go first. But this is what we hope to hear from those who have participated today. And so, how is this conversation inspiring you going forward about your own work? Or has it, I suppose? And if yes, what are you taking away from this and thinking to bring into your work in the future? So, Rich, you've always been first, so I'll just call on you this time. You want to go first?
Sure. I think, I have been kind of one of those people who's been out of the loop on Floodmar for the last 5 years. So I was in the initial conversations, but just from my outside perspective, I have seen the concept of Floodmar has just continued. So you are seeing it in news clips and it's a bigger part of the state's policy now. So I think that's been great. And then also, I just want to point out while he's here, what a kind of an inspiration Kamiar has been for all this and moving this forward. And so, Kamiar, I really appreciate all your leadership to move the Floodmar concept.
You're Rich.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Kamiar and Daniel, I'm going to have you not go yet. I can start calling on people if I have to, but who else would like to share their thoughts on this closing round robin?
I would like to share a thought, actually.
Yeah, go ahead, Abdul.
Two. The first one is I echo what Rich said, because Kamiar has been, he coined, I believe, the original term, floodmar, and gradually you see somebody else maybe, I don't know, but
Jenny Marr.
Oh, Jenny Marr. Okay, okay, I misstated, but seeing that how it has permeated over time, not among planners and engineers, resource managers, but as I said in the beginning, among policymakers as well. So the reason I'm bringing that in is I'm going to suggest maybe if it is conceivable or it's feasible, bring on like organize something statewide where we can bring the policymakers, if possible, the secretaries of different agencies and the directors of different agencies, relevant agencies, bring them together for maybe a dialogue or a discussion or perspective. I think that will provide, in my view, a further, traction to the whole process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Abdul. That idea is not very far off from one of the strategies that's behind this. Is that is it 2025 is theoretically the right cycle for the next Floodmar forum, right, Jenny? Yeah. So the Floodmar forum has become a every other year, which is biennial. And so the idea is that this evaluation will have a prominent spot there. And I think your broader ideas, Abdul, is something that would be really great to fold into that when it's time to start developing that. Jenny, do you have some concluding thoughts? It looks like maybe you're wrestling with a pet at the moment.
I am. She's getting very antsy. I think
Okay.
she's ready to go outside. I do, and they're probably a little specific, but the value of just having this community to talk to, I think is such a success out of this. And there were a couple things mentioned today, which are ideas that have been kind of bubbling around in my mind more recently. And I would love a space to have this conversation. And I don't know what that future space is, but this idea of, a local organization or whatever it might be that helps kind of at the day-to-day managing of high flow situation and managing kind of these water rights, almost like, not to the extent of a water master, but kind of in that similar role where they're, thinking about these diversion decisions with existing water rights. And also, this idea of a water rights pool, because I'm growing more and more uncomfortable with the trajectory of Floodmar, where we're getting underwater rights, over the 90th percentile, our extreme events, our climate change, that we're just going to have the entire hydrograph in any scenario hardened in a water right. Like, to me, that makes me uncomfortable. And I kind of hear that other people are thinking about some broad ideas. And it'd be great to have a space to continue some of this conversation. So I'm taking that away, that there's some people thinking about some similar things that, could evolve Floodmar and, have these larger scale impacts that we're hoping for. So I am inspired to continue that conversation.
Jenny, there's an indigenous or at least pre-colonial subject that's it's tickling my brain. I'm just going to say it out loud so you can help me remember that we should talk about it more. Where there's a person in the community whose job it is to help navigate who gets water when. I've read about this. Does anybody else know what I'm talking about? I think it's an indigenous cultural practice that has a title that goes with that person's role. Anyway, when you were talking about that, it caught my attention as maybe a place to draw inspiration from.
Is that the acequia system in New Mexico? The
Maybe
acequia?
that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, that might be it, Daniel. But yeah, there was a person in the community who was trusted to come along and tell you when it was your turn to open the board and let the aqueduct water flow onto your land.
We call them water masters now.
Yeah, now we do, but that has all sorts of legal attached to it. Anyway, just a thought. Okay, how about you, Tim? What are your concluding thoughts today?
Oh boy. Uh, onward. I mean, I think we have to we have to keep advancing these questions and be persistent here. This is a societal shift, and I agree with Jenny. I think now is the opportunity to rethink how we can approach adaptation to our changed hydrology in an equitable way, and open up new concepts for that. So I think that's probably our heaviest lift in front of us right now to effectuate better utilization of the waters when they come.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Emmanuel, do you have some closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So the question is, has this conversation inspired me, about my own work? So right now we are developing an economic analysis guidebook for watershed management and multi-benefit planning. Certainly, this, FloodMar centers around multi-benefit approaches as a core for water management. So that's one of my major takeaways as part of this R&D plan and moving forward, as part of the network, hopefully. So really, this conversation has certainly prompted me to reflect deeply on how FLAGMAR and similar efforts fit into the broader water management strategies, particularly within the context of economics, climate resilience, and equity. So really, just to align with my own work in economic analysis. So I'm kind of inspired, we're talking about, I think many people are talking about the cost of doing things, the short-term cost, but let's talk about the long-term benefit of doing FLAGMAR, right? So there are certainly some aspects like ecosystem services that we're not even quantified about. So that's why we call it benefit cost analysis. So if we are so hindered by its costs from a short-term perspective without looking at the short-term, long-term impact of how FLAGMAR would address issues surrounding climate change or drought preparedness along that lines, which many of those cannot even be quantified from a monetary perspective. So my main takeaway is, I do believe FLAGMAR has value and it needs to be pursued to the extent that we could manage it in a way that sustain our water resources in California. So that's my closing thought.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. I once heard a speaker, it was at LA County Public Works a long time ago at a funding fair, and I've tried to track back to who it was, and I haven't been able to do it, so I can't cite them well. But they were suggesting that if we had modern cost benefit analysis procedures in place when we were debating the Clean Air Act, the US Federal Clean Air Act, we would have discovered costs greatly outpaced the benefits based on what everyone assumed those benefits would be. But after having passed the Clean Air Act, the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary benefits of that bill were nowhere near the discussion and vastly outweighed the costs. And so there's part of me that always reflects on that comment as thinking about how can we not get caught in the trap of not doing the right thing. because it's change and people are scared of change, and we've got systems that allow them to throw complexity at the idea, even though it's the right thing to do. So anyway, just one of the things that you caused me to reflect on, Emmanuel. And I appreciate the comments. Thomas, you're the last of our vocal participants today. Do you have some concluding thoughts?
You're asking me at a moment of transition.
Oh no.
Um,
Well, be safe.
I'm moving from one place to the other, but let me say it very quickly and briefly. This has been an amazing and, as others have said, inspiring effort. Coming from the science side, we're committed to continue to working on this and bringing the science that we do. And I don't think I'm making a mistake by saying I'm also speaking for Helen, who's on sabbatical leave, Helen Dalkey. We will continue to be engaged on the science side of this and communicating the science side of this, and bringing to the table what we can to further the cause. And it's very inspiring and exciting to have this group and not just do this in an academic isolation. It's very exciting to have this group and so many people are engaged in this.
Thanks, Thomas. Man, we are living in the future. Our talking on from his bike to a video call with people scattered around the state. It's amazing, man. Just amazing. Okay, so as a member of the RAC, I'll swap hats for a second. I think my engagement with Floodmar has ebbed and flowed. It's been mostly focused on the network, although it started really with the People and Water subcommittee. And I think one of the main things I look back on at that time is we really leaned into the research part of the question that was before us, and thinking about how to support an NSF proposal that's got a bunch of people doing like primary research out in communities, and how to strengthen that effort. And that part of this didn't happen. Like a big, robust, multi-university on the ground research endeavor. There are pieces of that, but it didn't come. One big thing we were blind to is the water quality implications faced by marginalized communities that have degraded water quality already. We just didn't talk about it, and it is one of the things that I wish we had found then, because I think our priority actions would have looked different if we had found it during that work. And so one of the things that I'm really inspired to do is to stay involved and find a way to like tackle that piece, because we did miss it in the RDD plan and it needs to happen. I think it's an essential next step. So that's kind of why I'm inspired to do. And my role over in the SAFER program, working for State Board, allows me to be, I think, maybe one of the bridge builders of this next piece of the conversation. So that's where I'm kind of inspired to take this forward. There are a lot of folks who never talked and never came on camera who are here listening today. Do any of you want to contribute any concluding thoughts? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Nat.
Hey, I'm Nat Seavey. At the time when this started, I was involved with the, from the environmental conservation side of things. I work on bird conservation. I was working for Point Blue Conservation Science at the time. Almost as soon as it got started, I took another job with the National Audubon Society, so I haven't been here. It's been really fun. This is like where you always want to fast forward and see what happens 5 years from now, and that's exactly what I feel like has happened, and it's been really fun to hear about the progress. Super exciting stuff. The thing that strikes me is hearing just a little bit about how difficult it is to get broad engagement in something new and for people to be willing to take the risk even 5 years later, and how often we see that. I am dealing with it now in terms of clean energy, offshore wind. So many of the big challenges we have that element of risk to it that we have to figure out how to manage. And I think the environmental NGO community is really recognizing that we need to change our position on that risk and think more proactively about how we help people tackle that. And so I think it's just, really exciting to see this work going along, and I think society evolving along with these kind of concepts as they go, not just in water management, but in lots of different environmental challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. It's neat to have that your insights from the jump from the beginning to the end here. That's great. Are there any others? Okay. So we have Daniel and Cammy queued up to do some closing, but I also stopped you from doing your own closing thoughts because I figured they would mirror one another. So why don't we start with you, Daniel? Share your thoughts from this process and, help us wrap today's meeting, and we'll go then to Cammy after you.
Very good. Sorry, let me pull my notes back up. Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say it was an honor to be invited by DWR to be a co-chair of the RAC back in 2017, I think. And it's also seeing what's happened has been a highlight of my career to advance FLEDMAR. As many of you know, I'm partially retired now and moving towards more retirement next year. In thinking about the evolution of this whole process, I really think FLEDMAR has come a long way, as everyone's been saying. I think about it early on in 2011 when Don Cameron was promoting the initial idea of recharging on farmland, and he was called it was a crazy idea. And people don't talk about this as a crazy idea anymore. That to me is an indicator of how far we've come. As we talked earlier about, GSAs are including recharge. It's a standard inclusion in every GSA, whether they're entirely incorporating FLEDMAR as a concept or just parts of it. It varies still, but it's now completely accepted. And the ag industry groups are advancing the concept. It's not just no longer a crazy idea, but the Almond Board of California, the American Pistachio Growers, wine grape and walnut groups are now looking towards figuring out how to promote it amongst their growers because they see it as a solution to their water shortages that they're facing. We've seen the governor's executive orders. And I also just want to call out that Natural Resources Conservation Service, who originally at the time of the RAC didn't even think of recharge as being a resource issue, that groundwater depletion was not a resource issue. They completely changed their policy and are now providing cost share funding to farmers to conduct on-farm recharge. So, I mean, all of these things happen because of this catalytic effort of this network or the RAC. And then the network, of course, is its own another product that I think is significant achievement from this effort. And it broadened the engagement from the original RAC members who were primarily more academic and research focused to being technical specialists and practitioners out in the field now that are part of this effort. As Glenn said, it'd be great to have a broader group yet, but we've certainly moved. And that participation has highlighted the challenges that still need to be addressed at both the institutional and policy levels that weren't part of the initial research, I think. I think the network has also catalyzed and augmented some additional initiatives that have sort of spun off of this effort. There's all the FURO work that's gone on. There's the environmental justice, the NGO Groundwater Collaborative, which works on groundwater issues, the Groundwater Leadership Forum, there's a flood study group. All of these groups are talking about FLEDMAR now and grappling with it as in their realms. And the San Joaquin Valley Collaborative Action Group, the San Joaquin Valley CAP, initiated a water rights permitting action group that Jenny and others, well, Jenny's an advisor to, but not participating in. But we get input from all these other subgroups that are out there that have spun off of this effort. And we can't, I think, forget that Sigma has been a major driver to help the FLEDMAR effort achieve its success. as we said, recharge is fully accepted. Now the question is clarifying when and how much is feasible to be permitted, will be critical to Sigma success as well as to the FLEDMAR approach. So I would just encapsulate my vision for what's next is an even more broadly integrated FLEDMAR approach. Kamyar, you've been such a pioneer in thinking big. And I came into this really from the farm and district level adaptation and adoption process. We were looking to get farmers to even buy into it. We were looking at getting districts to buy into it. Now that we've got that success, I think the DWR watershed studies have shown us the potential of the full watershed scale approach, and that needs to be really the direction we go if we're going to build the support we need across agencies. And that means combining FERO with environmental flow protections, with gray and green infrastructure investments to capture the available water. If we're going to really see FLEDMAR achieve its outcomes, we need to take what's been shown in the watershed studies as potential and now take that to the public and to the agency to build acceptance, as I said earlier, around how do we build a water diversion strategy that looks at all of those pieces together, that doesn't just look at water supply, doesn't just look at Sigma implementation, but looks at flood management and flood protection, looks at environmental flow thresholds on the rivers, that looks at community drinking water needs, and Sigma compliance as well. And that's going to take a cross state agency coordination process to identify that acceptable diversion amount and to optimize all of those other concerns. And I think the watershed studies and the FLEDMAR RAC have shown us we can look at all these issues. It seemed overly complex and too difficult. I think a lot of people looked at the white paper initially and said, we can't do all of that, but we've shown that we can bring a group of people together to do that. And I just, again, want to say DWR has been such a champion, but to expand to this next level of broader agency buy-in is going to require the governor's office leadership and, importantly, advocacy by all of the private and academic and NGO sectors that are involved. And I've really learned the importance of the role that as an NGO we can play in a process like this, because we can ask questions like, why not, of agencies, and expand the assumptions and thinking in ways that it's really hard for agencies individually to protect their mandate to be able to ask those questions. So I just see, again, more engagement from those other players to drive that change.
Thanks, Daniel. I really appreciate it. Kamyar, you got about 8 minutes.
I think Daniel should have gotten the last word because I ditto everything you said, Daniel. And what I'd like to add, and I'll try not to repeat what Daniel shared, is a big thank you to everyone who participated in the Research Advisory Committee. It was, kind of a test to see, can we bring together that many experts without paying them to work collaboratively on something that at the time seemed very conceptual and not something that necessarily was going to be what it is today. So I really appreciate people's passion for this type of work and the trust in the process. I also really think the process was what it was because of the deft facilitation by CCP and Stantec. And certainly Jenny Marr is kind of at ground zero for getting all of this together. I mean, I threw out ideas and she made them come to pass. So I really appreciate all of the effort. I truly believe that the Research Advisory Committee and the plan um, are the nucleus of the Floodmar network. The Floodmar network would not have existed had it not been for this collaborative um, effort by the numbers, over 200 people, and now 500 as part of the network. I I am convinced that collaborative problem solving uh, is what is needed to deal with the many challenges that we're facing, including climate change, and that those solutions require multi-sector, multi-benefit projects on a watershed scale. And I think the Floodmar network, the RAC, the watershed studies that I think are a direct outcome of this work um, are demonstrating uh, that. And I agree with Daniel's point and others that we need to now be able to communicate the great work of the network and the Research Advisory Committee with a broader audience so that they not only understand, but emulate this work in most every watershed of California. And while Floodmar has been kind of the focal point of this work, the subliminal to me is the multi-sector, multi-benefit collaboration, joint discovery, joint problem solving that's going to be needed to get us to where we need to go. And that's why I think this is a model for how other societal water challenges can and should be tackled. So I think we probably shouldn't lose sight of the reason we're doing all of this is that it's to scale up Floodmar in across California's watersheds. And if I had my druthers and the resources to do it, I would say we need to do similar watershed studies in every major watershed of California, because I am convinced that those who live and work and rely on the watersheds that have been analyzed so far are much better equipped to understand their climate vulnerability and the strategies that are at their disposal to solve it. And the nice thing about the watershed studies is we assume perfect institutional coordination and cooperation. And in real life, we know that's not what's happening. So I think to scale up, what we really are going to have to bear down on, which is not easy, are the institutional challenges. And I think they're in large part the result of our siloed approach to water planning. And it's not about weakening regulations and protections for the environment. It's about aligning them toward a common purpose. And on the analytical side, I think more and more we're going to need the data to demonstrate how much did we actually recharge in this wet season. And that's something that everyone wants to know. And I think we need to get a better way to demonstrate that, as well as the analytical tools to really guide us in our water planning. We talked about it a little bit I think what gets us, what doesn't help us is single sector optimization, which really works well for the sector that's doing the optimization, but can cause problems for the other sectors. And we don't really have good tools yet to do multi-sector optimization. I think we're moving in that direction with the watershed studies. And we need to keep, I think this is a research area that we need to work on, is what are the indicators and the tools that are needed for multi-sector optimization. So with that, I just want to thank you all. If it's not been evident, this work is really one of my passions, has been over the last number of years. And it really helps demonstrate and illustrate many of the other things that I believe in, and that is the multi-sector, multi-benefit approach to water management. So thank you, and I'll be, if you haven't heard yet, I'll be retiring at the end of December. I won't disappear, and I look forward to and will follow the work of the network. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Kamyar. To have both of you offer closing comments and drop the bomb of the retirement right around the corner is inspiring and intimidating. And just, I mean, thank you both, from me and perhaps from everyone else for the roles that you've played.
I'll miss you all.
Well, we'll see you at the lunch Mars.
Yes, you will.
Okay, so that's the end of the agenda that we have. We really, really, again, on behalf of my team and on speaking for the department too, thank you very much for your commitment to this work, to setting aside time to engaging with us on this evaluation, and of course, before it, the RDD plan itself. And you'll see more communications from Jenny or the folks on the consultant team that are working on this, and we'll have the evaluation out and shareable into everyone else, hopefully towards the beginning of the year. Any last thoughts from you, Jenny, administrative side?
Nothing from the administrative side. You said what I was hoping to say at the end. I want to thank and recognize Daniel and Kamyar for their leadership and guidance in the Floodmar world over the last 7 years. Every initiative needs a champion to be successful, and we've been lucky to have you two. You leave a vacuum behind, and hoping because we've built this community, we'll be able to have people ready to step into these roles and provide the leadership. But you have been an inspiration and a great leader for all of us in this space, and appreciate your time and best wishes for your retirement.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.